Michael, knowing you were coming on tonight, I have been so curious as to what you made of these last two nights. I don't know if you heard at the top of the broadcast, I said a national Democrat said to me tonight, having watched this attack on the front runner, I hope they know what they're doing.
Yeah, I've watched and I've listened and I've listened to all the punditry over the last 24 hours. Let me say, as someone here who's sitting in the Midwest, and I don't think people understand. I think a lot of Democrats don't understand. A lot of people who are in the leadership don't understand. This isn't 1980. This discussion of Reagan Democrats, of this sort of the working class. You talk about the working class like it's Lunch Bucket Joe. The working class, the majority of the working class in this country are women. When you say working class, you're talking about young people, 18 to 35. They make the least amount of money. When you're talking about working class, you're talking about people of color. They make the least amount of money. That's who the working class is. But somehow when we have these discussions on these shows, we talk about, well, you know, we got to not get too far to the left here or be too progressive because we'll lose that white working class vote. Well, I don't know, maybe that was true 30 or 40 years ago. It's not true now. It's not the America we live in. Nearly 70% of the electorate next year, eligible voters next year in this country, 70% are either going to be women, people of color, or young people between the ages of 18 and 35, or a combination of the three. That is America in 2019, 2020. Not this kind of conversation we're having about how we better stay moderate here because we don't want to lose who? Who don't you want to lose? 2/3 of the white men who voted for Trump? News alert, they're not coming. You know, some of them will come. Trump got 8 million people who voted for Barack Obama, either once or twice, voted for Trump. So there's a chance maybe 1 million of them might come back. But guess what? Trump only won by 77,000 votes, combined votes between Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. So we don't need 1 million, folks. We just need 77,000. I think we can find them with that 70% majority. And by the way, all the public opinion polls show, and I watched Steve Kornacki. I study Steve Kornacki, and
he's smiling.
The proof is there that the majority of Americans support a raise in the minimum wage. The majority of Americans believe in the Equal Rights Amendment for women. The majority of Americans are against mass incarceration. The majority do not want to put people in prison for marijuana. Go down the whole list of issues. The majority of Americans take the liberal, progressive position. And they will come out, if they're inspired, to vote for the candidate that's going to side with them. And this discussion that we're having seems to be less about that and more about this mythical voter that we don't want to lose in the Democratic Party. They've been lost. Yes, we can get some of them back, but we don't really need them. And Ann Richard, I got to meet her before she passed away, the former governor of Texas. And she said to me, a fact that is rarely repeated is that no Democrat, other than twice since World War II, since Harry Truman, only twice has the Democrat who ran for president and won got the white male vote. Twice. Once with Lyndon Johnson in the landslide of '64, a year after Kennedy was killed. And the second time was Clinton's second election. So that means John F. Kennedy lost the white male vote. Jimmy Carter lost the white male vote. Clinton lost the white male vote in the first election. Of course, Barack lost it both times. So let's stop talking about how we can get this middle class, this Midwestern, middle America. Quit talking about it like it's like this. Like we got to get those middle Americans out there in the field of dreams, out in the cornfield. It's not that anymore. The working class is women. The working class are people of color. The working class are young people. And this whole discussion about it, they're not attacking Barack Obama. I think Lawrence said it, that the good thing about liberals and Democrats is this sort of self-analysis and willing to be critical of each other to improve ourselves. But if you're going back even to Barack Obama in 2008, since 2008, that's now 10, almost 11 years ago, when he won, Since that moment, nearly 40 million people went from being 17 years old to 18 years old. 4 million every year become adults, become voters. You've got 40 million people in this 10 to 11 year period who weren't voters at that time, but became voters during those years from then until now. They don't know what you're talking about when you talk about this Michigan, Macomb County, Reagan Democrat, all this stuff. I remember my parents' friends talking about waxing poetic about Calvin Coolidge. We were like, what? You know, it's, be quiet, the Beatles are on Ed Sullivan. We don't want to, let's get out the Democratic base of young people, women, and people of color. And for the 1/3 of the white guys who voted for Hillary last time, good on you. Come on back and bring a couple of your buddies who mistakenly voted for Trump. But that's all we've got to do, folks. The worst thing to do is to moderate, to go to the center, and to think that's how we're going to win. This is how we're going to lose. If we don't run a street fighter, if we don't run somebody who's going to inspire people to come out and vote, we're going to lose again. And I think nobody listened to me last time when I said this, that Trump was going to win. He was going to win Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And I don't want to say it out loud because I don't want it to happen. But I think a lot of people watching this right now know it already did happen once, so you know it can happen again. And it will happen again if we don't run the right candidate, a beloved American who's not an inside the beltway politician type person, but somebody who's going to be a street fighter and fight for that 70% majority that's going to take us back into the White House.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.